Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us. My name is Jeff Scott, and I'm with the City of San Jose Housing Department. I believe there are still a few people that are continuing to join the meeting, so I'll admit those people as they come online. But I want to thank you all for being here. This is the first meeting of the Housing Department's new Community Engagement Series. We'll be hosting meetings like this every month, and they're going to be on a wide range of topics. Those topics will vary from month to month. And our intention is to share information about new regulations, new policies, and upcoming changes in our department. And we want to give community members an opportunity to ask questions and to provide feedback. In the interest of transparency, an invitation to this meeting went out to several thousand people in the community. In fact, more than 10,000 people who have asked to be kept up to date on changes and policies in our department. We also promoted this via email, via social media, and a number of other channels. And I also want to let everyone know that this meeting is being recorded. And after this meeting, in the next day or so, we'll post the recording of this meeting as well as the presentation from today's meeting online so that people can use that as an archive and go back and review that or watch that video if they're not able to watch any or all of the meeting today. And in just a moment, I'm going to hand things over to Eric Sullivan. He's going to lead today's meeting. Eric, of course, is the director of our department. And I just want to let everyone know that if you would like to submit questions for Eric, the best way to do so is to use the chat function. And so I have access to the chat function. And if you submit questions there, I can pass those questions along to Eric, and he'll be able to answer those. And if we are not able to answer all of the questions today, if we don't get to all the questions today, then we will post answers along with the recording that I just mentioned and the presentation. We will also provide answers to all the questions or any of the questions that we're unable to get to today. So our intention really here is to make sure that we give as much information as possible to you. And if we're unable to answer your questions today, that we follow up. With that, Eric, I'm going to hand it over to you, and I'm going to share my screen and bring up the presentation for today's meeting.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. Jeff, is there a technical challenge? Okay.
Yeah, hold on. I'm difficult sharing my screen here. Sorry about
that. Well, while Jeff is doing that, I'll just make a quick introduction. So we are looking to start this series that Jeff had mentioned in order to provide just a more consistent forum open to all parties, interest groups, organizations interested in the work of the housing department. As many of you know, the work of the housing department spans a broad spectrum from our work around homelessness and outreach and engagement, management of interim housing, our application utilization of federal grants and funds, to our work around asset management, housing production, housing finance, across the spectrum from affordable housing, and our work around market rate housing. And so we have a broad spectrum of charges, initiatives, programs, and investments. And the intent of this starting new monthly series we're going to do is to provide information about ongoings and happenings within the department, about upcoming as well as past. The first few that you'll see here will be about initiatives and programs that have recently passed the housing department, have recently been passed by city council and the mayor, and then some projecting out of upcoming regulations, programs, and initiatives that the department is working on, both under a charge and a direction from city council and mayor, and those items that I have seen is since entering this position here in May of 2024, that the department needs to improve upon. Whether that is our work around regulations to key programs that we operate, or it is regulatory updates to better reflect new direction from council and mayor, changes in state law, changes in federal law. So this is an opportunity and a forum to sort of engage in those series of changes, spanning the entire scope of the work that the department does, and to have an open forum. So the goal of this, as Jeff had mentioned, is to provide the information, receive questions, answer as much of the questions as we can get to here in the next hour period here after short presentations. And then we'll be posting and recording all of these sessions on our website alongside our responses to all the questions that may have been asked so that we can keep the public informed about these changes and keep an open and running dialogue with all constituencies and groups. So Jeff, do you want me to potentially do the sharing here? There are some challenges there. Okay, one minute to see. Okay, well, you send me the email here. So we've worked out our technical difficulties. So I'm in fact going to share from my screen. So I will do this now, kick off the presentation. Then afterwards, we'll be able to kind of engage in some questions here. So. Okay. All right. So due to a technical difficulty in the setup this, and this is always the challenge when we're starting a new communications platform, we're not going to be able to share it simultaneously. So Jeff is making the link available now in our website so that folks can follow along. And I will walk through, it's a very brief presentation that talks through two of our incentive programs for multifamily production that council and mayor have passed recently. One is the downtown incentive program, which was passed in June of 2024. The second one, which was passed in December of 2024, is the Growth Areas Multifamily Incentive Program. So we'll walk through very briefly what are some of the key components of each of these programs. And as you will see in the presentation, when you have an opportunity to download it online and view it online, you will also see a brief schedule of upcoming other programs that we intend to make a part of this monthly communications dialogue. Today's multifamily housing production incentive program in April We're going to be talking through our draft moderate income housing strategy that is currently in production and in draft form. In May, we will be coming back to talk through updates to our underwriting guidelines for financing the development of affordable housing, as well as what are the key components of the request for proposals for affordable housing production. So that'll be in May. Throughout the course of the balance of the year, we'll be bringing forth through this channel updates regarding our department performance dashboard, as the department has responded to both state audits and city audits on the need to clarify the performance metrics of the housing department across the entire range of the housing continuum that we serve. And we have developed new dashboards, and we'll be bringing forth those for consideration and feedback from this community communication channel, followed by our work around the inclusionary housing ordinance, particularly the regulation side of it, as we're going to look to streamline some of the operations. We're looking and analyzing the fees. We're also, to wrap up this series for this planned year, going to be doing updates to our tenant protection ordinance regulations. So just on the regulatory side, not on the ordinance side, and the apartment rent ordinance regulations as well, looking to clean up and streamline the regulations on both aspects in response to various activities and challenges and projects, as well as initiatives that have occurred over the years. And now, since both regulations, the tenant protection ordinance and the apartment rent ordinance, are close to a decade old or more, it's time to just do some refreshing and some revisions. And so we'll bring those updates and those proposed changes to this community channel so we can receive comprehensive feedback from the community here. So that is the kind of the goal and the objectives of this. And for this first one, as I had mentioned, we're really focused on our two incentive programs. The first, as I mentioned, is in June of last year, it was a downtown high-rise incentive program, which was adopted by mayor and council as a way to spur more production in our downtown area. I will note a key trend throughout both programs that were passed by mayor and council to incentivize housing production was the following fact. In 2024, 0 new starts of construction had occurred in multifamily market rate production. Given the city's RENA goals to achieve over 62,000 new housing units in the city, we had to find ways to get some momentum around production in our downtown core, hoping to bring more high rises into the space, as well as, and this is the second part, which is our growth areas housing production incentive, get new production and units occurring in areas of growth, like in North San Jose, in areas surrounding the downtown, so we can get more units under production. And so those are the two we're going to talk about today. And first, I'll just begin with the downtown high-rise incentive program. So this program has been around for a number of years. The program did not perform to expectations in terms of producing the amount of units that were included in the initial projections from a couple of years ago. And so we brought forth this consideration to mayor and council in June of last year with the intention of how do we create modifications, how do we revise some of the incentives within the program to hopefully get some production going, in acknowledging two important factors. The first is, in the current economic environment, there are lots of headwinds to the production of multifamily units. Those headwinds include, one, ever increasing treasury yields. So I will note just in the last couple of weeks, yields have been dropping. Interest rates were at the time in June on a trend downward and have sort of plateaued at this point, and that is a continuing headwind. While at the same time, the cost of materials, the cost of construction has continued to rise. in our current economic environment where we see increasing tariff taxes on imports and exports throughout, we're going to see additional headwinds to multifamily production. And so what the downtown high-rise incentive was designed for is how do we provide incentives to help developers meet some of those costs and still make projects financially feasible. So the goal and the recommendation that came from staff was to target a world of about just over 4,000 units that have been entitled and are looking for production within the city to do a two-phase program, and I'll walk through some of the summaries of that steps, to provide additional reductions in our construction taxes in order to catalyze more of those entitled properties into production, to reduce some of our parks fees, obligations that apply to these units, and then to then come back to council through better and more cohesive tracking by August of this year in 2025 with an update. So those were the charges around the downtown high-rise incentive and how we look to modify the program in response to some of the current economic climate. And so on the construction taxes side, the entire program sort of had three primary pieces to it. You have your construction taxes, you have your inclusionary housing ordinance as your two primary piece, and then your park fees. Beginning with the first fee, which is construction taxes, we wanted to find a way through this program to reduce that tax liability to new sites on their production in order to hopefully mitigate some of the other headwinds that I discussed: interest rates, cost of construction, cost of materials. So this program, what was proposed, was designed to take for any of the projects proposed, and I'll talk through some of the eligibility of the projects in terms of height. Again, this is a high-rise incentive program, was looking to create the following incentives under construction taxes. First, under phase one of the project, 100% reduction of both the CRMP and BNS, so building instruction versus construction road and maintenance program taxes that are administered through the city's Department of Transportation. And then phase two would move that reduction of 100% down to 50%. And this, based on some of the initial projections that went into the program, had a hopes of having significant impacts and reductions to the tax liability and hopefully getting some projects to move forward. The second part of this, so construction part is part one. Second part of it is park fees. This too had a two-step approach, whereby the parks fees were going to be reduced by 50%, or roughly $7,300 per unit in the phase one, which has a time period through August of 2025 to get and incentivize more projects to move forward. The phase two part of the park fee reduction is roughly 30%. So that way, again, to find ways in which to motivate some of the entitled projects, as in the downtown area, there are thousands of units that are entitled, and this was a way to reduce some of those fees. The third part of the downtown program incentive was a reduction in the inclusionary housing ordinance in lieu fees. Right now, the inclusionary housing ordinance is designed to provide options for developers who choose to build units that are affordable up to 100% AMI on the site or in the off-site, or as another alternative, pay a fee in lieu of creating the affordable units. What we have done with the downtown incentive program is to waive that in lieu fee, providing an additional financial incentive for the new projects to build up to 5% of the affordable units on site and take the benefits of the construction tax reductions and the park fee reductions to hopefully move their projects forward. The phase one of this, with the higher reductions in construction taxes and park fees, as well as the zero of in lieu fees, goes until December 31st, 2025, so to the end of this year. So we gave it a 18-month run from June, when the program was adopted by council, to December 31st of 2025 to hopefully start production. I will say we have yet to get a project to quite go, but staff is working hard and with our development community, and we're hoping through more communication channels about this incentive, we're able to move some projects forward. So that's phase one. The phase two, which takes the reductions in construction taxes from 100% to 50%, takes the park fees from 50% to 30%, but maintains a $0 of in lieu fees, so a complete waiver of the inclusionary housing in lieu fees, goes through January 2026. So this two-part step was designed to hopefully incentivize some of the thousands of units that are under entitlement in our downtown to get going, and to move forward with this production. And that was our downtown incentive program. And while we were bringing forth that program to council, we were then charged as staff to come back later in the year, which we returned in December, with a growth areas incentive program that builds off some of the incentive work that was done for downtown incentives. And that's what created our growth areas multifamily incentive program. So in December, and from June through December, we worked with developers to best identify those pressure points in an ever-changing economic environment during those 6 months that are needed to be addressed in order to help spur some investments in our growth areas. Again, thousands of projects under entitlement. We were trying to be specific and tailored in the way in which to get some of these projects opening. So we did some modeling around how best to incentivize, worked closely with a number of developers to identify those key areas, and then devised the following changes to our growth areas incentive program that again builds off the work from our downtown incentive program. So similarly, we have our 3 primary areas, our park fees, so that's very limited in the growth areas one, but that's a part of it, our construction taxes, and then our inclusionary housing ordinance. In construction taxes, again, we divided it into 2 phases. So phase 1 is the first sort of 12-month sprint, right, through December 31st, where it's a 50% reduction in your building and services tax, your BNS, and then your CMRP taxes. And we capped the total amount of units that can qualify from a list of eligible projects into that program. And that's phase 1 with construction taxes. For phase 2, that 50% reduction came down to 25% reduction. So that's the first part, construction taxes. The second part dealt with the inclusionary housing ordinance. And similar to the downtown incentive program, we eliminated the in lieu fees and then scaled some of the differences in the strengths of the markets within our growth areas, whereby a strong market area, which traditionally has a sort of fee based on the square footage in that area, we allowed for a 5% creation of units on site in both our strong market areas and then our moderate market areas. The differences between those two are more technical in nature, but a similar approach applied, whereby we eliminated the in lieu fees and then allowed for both a 5% on-site reduction, a 5% on-site production of affordable units up to 100% of area median income. So this, similar to the downtown program, the multifamily growth areas incentive was trying to target ways in which we can spur some production of housing units. The last component of the growth areas incentive program, again, a smaller piece, but really focused on some of the disparities in fees in our North San Jose park fees. What the growth areas incentive program did was to allow for private recreation credits up to 50% of the total amount of fee imposed, and then also reduced the rate in order to bring the R park fees in line to all of the other fee assessments throughout other areas of the city. As you'll see in the presentation, once you get a chance to download it, that the delineation of the various fees throughout the city and how this reduction in the fee just in a particular zone in North San Jose created that alignment and was able to capture a number of projects that were on the verge of moving forward but needed some incentive to progress. And what we've seen thus far with the growth areas incentive program is that a number of projects have moved forward. There's already a public notice of a coming public meeting regarding the first project to come forward in the multifamily housing incentive program for our growth areas. And that project is at 905 North Capitol. There'll be two other projects that'll be quickly taking up these incentives in order to move production forward and hopefully bringing thousands of units online here. As I mentioned, the first phase through December 31st of the growth areas program is capped at 1,500 units. And so we're seeing good uptick, and we encourage any of the developers participating in this call to reach out to the housing department to get your project kind of going and hopefully take advantage of this, as that cap of units, 1,500, also has a time period ending, which is December 31st of this year. So both of our incentive programs, our downtown incentive, our growth area incentive, has two different phases. The first phase of which is the highest of the incentives, and it expires on December 31st of 2025. And then there's a phase two that continues on at lower incentive rates. And these programs were designed to hopefully spur some housing production to get what was zero market rate unit starts, hopefully get that going forward. And based on the performance we've seen thus far for the growth area incentive program, we're getting some good results. And we're hoping to max out that cap of 1,500 unit availability to participate in the max reductions of taxes and fees. So that's a quick summary. Again, apologies for the technical difficulties and not being able to provide the PowerPoint presentation, but it is posted online. Welcome you to download it. And if you have any questions now, happy to receive questions here. And if you have additional questions, Jeff, if there's an email online that they can email additional questions, is that correct in response to the presentation?
Yeah, Eric, I'll put my email address in the chat so people can send emails directly to me. And yeah, and as Eric said, you can post questions in the chat, and I'll have Eric answer as many as we can right now. And I also just want to apologize again for this for the problem not being able to share the presentation in real time. That was just a mistake I made in configuring Zoom for this, so I apologize. All right, Eric. So we do have a couple of questions just to get things rolling. The first question is about in lieu fees, and the question is, does allowing in lieu fees defeat the goal of sprinkling affordable housing throughout the city rather than concentrating it in one area or one building?
Well, that's a good question, and I'll provide some broader context before I provide the specific answer. So in looking at the design and the history of the inclusionary housing ordinance, there are, if you span sort of the municipalities and the region throughout the state who have inclusionary housing ordinances, there are ways in which you can design it to push developers towards paying of in lieu fees, and I'll talk about the past revenues received, which are relatively meager, its contributions to our overall affordable housing program that spurs housing, or you can encourage through the design of the inclusionary housing ordinance to build units on site or to build units off sites. Within the context of the inclusionary housing ordinance, the goal is to get market rate development to include affordability up to 100%. The payment of fees, and here are some of the facts to it. Over the last few years, the inclusionary housing fee, because the production rates have been so low on the market rate side, we've only received just under about $5 million. That is a minor component of the city's affordable housing lending program. The majority of the revenues received by the city to lend into affordable housing projects comes from our Measure E sources, our low to moderate income fees, our CDBG and federal sources. So in the totality of available programs to invest in the creation of affordable housing through gap financing, the inclusionary housing fees paid into through the in lieu fee structure is relatively minor. Two, when you look at the total production of units that are affordable, the city has seen an ever increasing rise in the cost of the total amount of units, two, the cost of the total amount of gap financing on a per unit basis that is needed in order to produce affordable housing. As an example, if you go back to our NOFAs beginning in roughly 2020, some of our per unit subsidies to deals that were approved by mayor and council were between 90,000 and 110,000. That has raised over the years based on the 2022 NOFAs to 174,000 up to 207,000. And now as we're going forward and bringing in an RFP and a notice of funding ability for the next round of potential funding, we're seeing those per unit subsidy rates rise above 225,000. And the cost of units growing from, which was 2020, roughly 600,000, now up to roughly 900,000. So your totality of cost is increasing, your totality of per unit subsidies is increasing. So when we look at the utilization of the inclusionary housing ordinance, that's roughly about, say you get roughly about 5 million. You divide that out by where future application into units you're going to get at roughly about 225,000 on an average basis. Your total amount of units being produced from the inclusionary housings, just that lane of funds, actually turns out to be less than the total amount of units we can get if we were to waive the fee and then allow for developers to produce with 5% minimum of affordable housing units on site, more units, because they're able to get the additional equity and capital to bring into the financing stack. And because the IHO is such a small part of the window of various sources that we have going into NOFAs, and you'll see that as we come back later in this month-to-month production, as I mentioned at the top of it, where we're going to release the next RFP and the next NOFA, which we're targeting is probably over 50 million at this point of the next wave of funding that's going to come through. Just our cost of unit, our cost of subsidy per unit continue to go up. But we want to continue to provide that vital source of production. So we get both affordable units being produced and market rate units being produced, and better in line for achieving our goal of abundant housing stock in the city, which is our chief charge under the housing element.
All righty, Eric. We have a few more questions already. The next one is, are the fee reductions that you've discussed, are they applicable to repair permits and or permits for ADUs or not?
That is a good question. I will tell you the downtown incentive one would not be applicable to ADUs, because one of the areas I forgot to cover was you have to build a building to certain heights. So ADUs would not be eligible under the downtown incentive program. For the growth areas multifamily incentive program, I do not think they're eligible as well, but we'll confirm that in a follow-up posting of a complete response to the question.
All right, and this one, this gets into policy. It's a little bit off of what we've been talking about today, but it's housing policy, and that is, why doesn't the city use vacant housing, or is the city able to use vacant housing as affordable housing?
So I think if I understand the question completely, so vacant units, how do we effectively sort of acquire and then convert those into affordable units? If that is the question, please, put it something in the chat and we can make sure we're refining it. So that's a good question. When we look at the housing reports that the department produces on a quarterly basis, the fourth quarter report will be released by next week. It'll show that amongst Class C properties, our vacancy rate is actually 4%, which is extremely low. So although we see some vacant homes throughout the city, our totality of Class C rented units, of buildings of all sizes that fall within our Class C property, that vacancy rate is extremely low. If you then look at our Class A properties, so our most expensive market rate properties, that vacancy rate has climbed to above 6%. I think it's about now 6.7%, up from 6.3%. So we're having some more vacancy at the higher end of our scale. Given where that dispersion of vacancy is, Class A going up, Class C trending down, there's limited opportunity there for the city to effectively acquire sort of a diversity of vacant units that may be existing throughout the city for two reasons. One, our cost of land and units continues to rise. So now your average sort of single family home is priced at roughly $1.5 million nowadays. So the cost of acquiring a vacant sort of small multifamily building with say 10 to 12 units or so would be very high. Then the cost of rehab and improvements will also be high. And then to rent those out at more moderate incomes or low to very low income sale on the AMI will likely be cost prohibitive. So although there is some vacant units that are out there, the economics for acquisition, for rehab, for re-renting, then projected rents based on an affordability scale may create some headwinds to effective and economic utilization of some of that limited vacancy that exists throughout the city.
All right. So next question, I'm gonna paraphrase. I've seen a couple of times. I guess it gets into operating subsidy.
Mhm.
So for people who cannot afford housing, even affordable housing,
Mhm.
how are we able to help them pay for it?
So the city runs a number of programs, and as I highlighted at the top of our conversation, as you see in the presentation that's online, we're going to be coming forth with updates to a number of different programs that provides some subsidies or programs or regulations to limit kind of rent increases. And I'll give a few examples in response to the question. Number one, for those who are experiencing a immediate eviction or a spike in their rent that may cause them to potentially enter homelessness, we have a very robust system under our prevention of homelessness done in coordination with the county, as well as other nonprofit organizations to provide some direct cash assistance to those individuals. If you are living in a rent stabilized property subject to the apartment rent ordinance or to our tenant protection ordinance, then the city is able to put some caps on your increases in rent in order to limit the amount of rent payments by tenants. A third example would be through our production of affordable housing or through our production of market rate housing and including housing ordinance units or IHO units that are capped at particular AMI levels. That's another way that the city provides programmatic or direct financial support to limit rents and rent increases through those areas. So there are many different tools that the city can apply across the housing continuum to provide both direct and indirect assistance to individuals struggling with rent payments.
All righty. Next question. Is affordable housing here in San Jose, is affordable housing for rental only? Or are there affordable housing programs to buy apartments or homes?
Yeah, so affordable housing is not rental only. We do have under our inclusionary housing ordinance program, affordable homes for purchase. There are a couple of sites that have recently completed construction, and we will be announcing programs accepting applications for eligible buyers to purchase affordable homeownership units. The city also administers a historic program going back roughly 30 years, where we provided first-time homebuyer assistance for individuals of moderate to low income who wanted to buy an affordable homeownership unit. So there are a couple of ways in which that the city provides support for moderate and lower income families to gain affordability in homeownership.
Great. And before I go to the next question, I just want to make everyone aware that in the chat, if you haven't seen it, one of our staff here, Kristen Clements, she posted some of the market rate statistics, housing market statistics that Eric had alluded to. So Kristen included a link there, and you guys can check that out if you want. All righty, moving along. The next question. How much of these programs that you were talking about are paid for through federal funds, and do you foresee a reduction in that funding with the new administration?
So the two programs we focused on today, the downtown incentive program, the growth areas, multifamily incentive program, those are all subsidies provided through local taxes and fees garnered through local programs. So there are no federal fund attachments to those two programs. The city does receive on an annual basis somewhere between 6 million to 8 million in direct federal support for various housing programs, including the Community Development Block Grant, the Emergency Services Grant, the Home Program, as well as a few other programs, including housing for people with AIDS and a few others. So that scale of roughly 6 to 8 million we receive on an annual basis, it is difficult to predict at this time whether those sources will continue to be renewed. And as the federal budget process moves forward, we will provide kind of continuing updates. And maybe, Jeff, we can sort of add a session into this series as we're opening up, this communication channel with the community. We can add a session on some federal funding.
Okay, I will make a note of that.
Mm.
All righty. Next question, Eric, is a little change of pace. It's a little bit more broad. So what is your approach to enforcement? We have a number of existing ordinances and regulations and some new ones rolling out. And so can you share with us your approach to enforcement of these ordinances and regulations?
Sure. So Part of the work that I mentioned and what we're going to be bringing forth through this communication series is updates to the regulations of a number of different city programs. As I mentioned, the apartment rent ordinance, our mobile home park ordinance, our tenant protection ordinance, our inclusionary housing fee ordinance. All of those programs come with avenues and opportunities for enforcement. In addition to the work that we do with our what's referred to as our asset management portfolio, which are units that we have funded historically through city funds, providing loans to both construction and operating, and then are subject to affordability restrictions moving forward. So as the department improves and updates its regulatory positions on all of these programs, we're going to be looking to be more active in the space around program compliance in order to ensure that, number one, our developer partners are meeting the obligations of our funding programs, and number two, that we are protecting tenants who are living in these units across the city. So hopefully through this communication channel and the next one, we'll be able to kind of share the PowerPoint presentation and work through some of the kinks. You'll see on the available presentation online that Jeff has posted, the various programs that we plan to talk about through this channel, and we'll incorporate into those discussions areas around program compliance and enforcement.
All righty, next question. We still have a couple more. Is the city is having budget issues? It's been reported in the media. Do you expect those budget issues to impact the housing programs that you've discussed today?
So the two housing programs that we discussed today, the downtown incentive and the growth areas multifamily incentive program, will not be impacted by the city's current projected operating deficit of about 62 million. So strategies for reducing that operating deficit do not at this time include any reductions or amendments to those two incentive programs. As mayor and council go through the process of the budget, anything is possible. However, based on all the internal conversations that we are having and the projections about the impacts of those programs to the budget, I don't foresee any changes to either of the incentive programs as a result of the city's operating gap.
Okay, so I have one more question here. I'll read it in just a second. I'll remind everybody, if you do have a question you want to ask, please put that question in the chat and I'll share it with Eric. But the last question we have currently is, and I have to admit I don't fully understand this, but do you foresee developers making hardship claims or taking advantage of this and making hardship claims to try to get out of some of the fees that they are required to pay?
I think so. If the question is getting to whether or not an economic hardship during the course of construction or during the course of continuing operations creates a persuasive case for further reductions in fees or taxes or anything of that sort, the answer to that question would be no. There is a lane of for lack of a better adjective, lane of appeal, a lane of a claim for hardships. Those are few and far between. There is no data to date, despite all of the sort of economic challenges and turmoil that we have been through over the last 3 or 4 years of projects and developers seeking some additional reductions in fees or taxes because of economic hardships. We have not experienced that. There's no data for that. Going forward, there's always a lane for that. We don't project we're going to be experiencing a high uptick in any of those claims. As with any program lending, particularly around our affordable housing projects, there are projects throughout the city that have some financial challenges, and we're working through those challenges in cooperations with the developers and ensuring tenant protections remain in place. So if you are aware of particular tenants who are having challenges or projects that may be experiencing some unreasonable financial hardships, please reach out to us and we're happy to talk through some options and considerations with you.
And actually, one other question just came in, although I don't know if it's for our department or not. It says, what are the requirements to keep a building permit valid or active? Are you able to answer that, Eric, or is that for planning?
I am not able to answer that, but we will get with our partners in planning and provide an answer to that and post that answer online along with the video of this first community channel.
Great. All right. Well, I don't see any other questions here. But I just want to thank everybody. Thank Eric for his time, and yeah, thank everybody for participating. And just to reiterate on the timing, these meetings are going to be the first Thursday of every month, and so you'll look for the invites from me or from the housing department a couple of weeks ahead of time each month. Before each month, the first Thursday, we're going to probably keep it at the same time, same day, to get everyone, so everyone knows when to expect this and when to anticipate each of these meetings. So I guess with that, thank you very much all for participating. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.